Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning or evening, depending on where you're joining from for the World Hijab Day conference. We're going to begin with our speaker momentarily, but I just got a few messages for you first. So I just wanted to thank you again for joining us. And I would love to know where everyone is tuning in from. So let us know in the comments. I would love to know where you guys are from. I'm talking to you from Canada right now. So before we begin, we'd like to take a minute to thank our generous platinum sponsors for supporting the World Hijab Day conference this year. Jazakallah khairan to our sponsors Studious Monday and Modifa. Thank you guys so much. This conference means the world to us to be able to do. And so just before I introduce our lovely panelists for this session, we would like to take a minute and share with you our current fundraising efforts for our inclusivity program. World Hijab Day is creating a diversity education workshop for schools. Our Learning for Harmony and Educational Inclusivity program will aim to reduce bullying of Muslim students by providing an overview of Muslim culture. Our goal is to initiate this program in the fall of 2023, so this coming fall, with our school partners in Valley Stream, New York. If you're interested in donating to the fundraising efforts, you can do that at worldhijabday.com/donate. And you'll be able to also see our goal and see where we're at in meeting that also. So hopefully you guys can help us meet that goal before the school year begins, inshallah. Okay, so now I just want to introduce our lovely panelists for today, Afaf Nasher. She currently serves as the Executive Director for the New York chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, also known as CAIR-NY. Ms. Nasher obtained her doctor from St. John's University School of Law and has a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice. I love that. I love that criminal justice degree. I'd love to know more about that sometime. Thank you so much for joining me, Afaf. Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
There you go.
So despite the pandemic, you can still see that I sometimes need to unmute myself. So salam alaikum to Sister Ashley, to everybody in World Hijab Day, Sister Nazma Khan, who's the founder, obviously, and to all the people that have been promoting this, working on this on the back end, and of course, obviously, to everybody who's joining us in this program.
Walaikum salam. We're so excited to have you, and we're going to be talking about like discrimination in public space and workplaces and things like that. It's something I've never personally had to deal with, but I know that it happens everywhere. We hear stories about it in the news, because of laws, like in Quebec here in Canada, for example. But I've also heard a lot of my friends talk about maybe their mom put the hijab on and were discriminated against and stuff. So let's just dive right into this topic. Is work discrimination a prevalent problem within the Muslim community?
It absolutely is, Ashley. As a matter of fact, so let me just take a step back and let you know where I'm getting so much of this information. So
Yes,
again, I'm with this civil rights organization. I know that this is a worldwide program. So just to give context on where we're coming in with this. So I'm with an organization called CAIR-NY. It's the New York chapter of a civil rights organization here in the United States that's national. It stands for the Council on American Islamic Relations. And the type of work that we do, Ashley, really centers around discrimination that is mostly faith-based. It could also be ethnic-based. It could also be gender-based, obviously racism. And so the civil rights arena here in New York, obviously the home of the 9/11 tragedy, really kind of soared. Now, that doesn't mean that Islamophobia hasn't existed and only came into existence in 9/11. Quite the opposite. We know Islamophobia has been here since the inception of what is the United States. Having said that, Islamophobia is also a global problem. And so it makes me especially proud to be on this program, which is really kind of reaching out to sisters all across the nation and letting them know that, yes, you may find discrimination in the workplace, in the streets. Our young sisters may be finding it and experiencing it in schools, but there's often recourse. And we actually put together a presentation for our sisters, a PowerPoint presentation that centers around workplace discrimination. One little asterisk here is that the majority of what I'm saying is obviously based on American law and in particular laws here that are regional to New York. But a lot of what I'm saying is going to be carrying through. And I'm sure that many of the experiences that we'll be highlighting is applicable all over the world.
Great. Would you like to show us those slides now?
Yeah, let's see if we can get them on the screen. There
Sure.
we go. Okay, Bismillah. So again, I'm with the Council on American Islamic Relations. Sister Ashley had said relationships. Yeah, it is all about the relationships, especially with us sisters, alhamdulillah. And we have the honor and privilege of representing people with civil rights claims of all different kinds, unfortunately, including hate crimes, work discrimination. Some of that bullying work, Ashley, that you were talking about, that's something that we pay a lot of attention to. And we actually have an educator's guide. So I'd love to work with you guys more on this, inshallah. But let's hop into the employment discrimination. So for my sisters that are watching that are in the United States, first and foremost, we need to know where these laws come from. And obviously, I'm not going to go into every minutia, but rather just give the overlay. And for everyone that is here, we have federal laws and then we have state laws and local laws, right? And when we're talking about the workplace discrimination protections and many other protections when it comes to civil rights, we're talking about Title VII, which really got passed in the 60s due to civil rights activists, right? But there are many other laws that come into play as well. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, Discrimination Employment Act, the Equal Pay Act of 1963. And there are also agencies on the federal level as well on the state and city level that can help with discriminatory matters. And that applies obviously to those that are facing religious-based discrimination due to their hijab, because that's what it is. When somebody sees you in a hijab, they're discriminating not against the piece of cloth that's on your head, but rather what it represents, the fact that you're an observant Muslim covering your hair. Now, like we said, there are federal laws, but then there are state laws and state agencies. And I have to say that oftentimes, whether you're talking about in the United States or in other places, more local laws can sometimes be restrictive or can be more expansive, usually more expansive because the national or federal laws kind of give the bare minimum what everyone has to follow. Here in New York, and I am in New York, we're in New York City, there are laws that are actually even broader than the federal laws that seek to protect people even further than what the federal laws seek. So for example, we have very comprehensive laws on age discrimination, race, religious creed, and so on. And in locally here in New York City, we have what is called the Commission on Human Rights. This is not a new phenomena. You can find such commissions all over. And so hopefully there are agencies wherever you live that can also help. Now you'll notice, Ashley, that slide, that picture there, 23% of bias incidents or hate crimes occurred in the workplace. This is a result of a study that CAIR-New York did. We really went intensive and spent quite a bit of time in surveying our fellow New Yorkers. And we wanted to see what the prevalence is of discrimination, which goes right to the heart of your question. And we saw that 23% of those that responded to our survey said, yeah, I've definitely faced a bias crime or a hate incident at work. And those numbers actually only go up when we're talking about women in various places. So when we're saying the word discrimination, here we are throwing it around. What does that actually mean, right? Especially as it applies to here regional laws. And some of the things that I'm going to say, many of you that are listening or that have viewed this, or perhaps you're talking to a friend, they may say, wow, that actually happened to me. So it's important for us to go over these definitions. So an employee or job applicant is treated less favorably or differently because of a specific protected class. Now, that phrase, protected class, is really the key to understanding this, Ashley, because you have to look to the laws to see what do those laws protect. Here in the States, they protect classes of people based on specific characteristics. Those characteristics may be a person's race, religion, their gender, their sex. Here, there's also pregnancy and sexual orientation protections. There's national origin, age discrimination, disability. So you have even genetic information here in New York City. Like I said, it gets quite expansive, is protected under the types of classes that government would say, yes, we have an issue here. You win against something that is protected by the laws. But what kind of treatment then qualifies as discrimination? Excuse me. And so you have various things that can actually manifest itself. So discrimination may look like disparate treatment. What does that mean? That means I'm working with colleague B, who's basically doing the same functions as me, and yet I'm seeing her being treated or seeing him being treated in a way that far supersedes the way that I'm being treated, for example, right? So they may get better assignments, they may get better opportunities, right? They may be advancing while I know that my work product is actually the same, if not better, right? Sometimes companies have policies that they don't even realize or understand may cause this kind of inequitable injustice, right? And that's disparate impact, where, for example, there's a policy that says, all right, we are going to allow this this type of work to be done. But perhaps that policy has an impact that is more relevant to one class of people than others, right? So, for example, if they say something like, all right, from now on, anyone who works during Christmas time or whatever, is going to get this kind of benefit more so than others, or we are going to advance them more. Well, perhaps that impacts certain people who observe the religious holiday, right? And so
Right.
some people may say, well, that's a problem, isn't it? That could be discriminatory. Harassment is a big one. And with the Me Too movement, we've certainly seen a lot of cases of harassment come to light, and that can play itself out in many different ways. And then we have failure to accommodate. This is a huge one for us, Sister Ashley. And what that looks like, for example, is, we have, I know this is a Sisters Women's Conference, but everybody can benefit from this one. We have somebody who wants to go pray for Friday
Mhm.
prayers, right? Can the business make it work for you? What if, I need to do something that is religiously obligated because of my sincerely held religious belief, but the corporation won't allow me to do so? And we are going to talk a little bit more about this later on in the slides, but those are the kind of accommodations that we're talking about. In other words, it's not a policy that exists, but you're requesting that your employer accommodate you. And
Right.
retaliation is a no-brainer. Hey, if you're being retaliated against, if because of your religion, if somebody catches you praying on the job and then all of a sudden they're retaliating against you with kinds of crazy penalties or injustices, or let's say, for example, you go to HR, human resources, and you report discriminatory actions or behavior, and now all of a sudden you're getting fired or you're getting treated and badly. That can be due to retaliation, and that is also not legal here. So I'm going to give you guys some real life examples, because as much as like we like to talk about things, actually understanding it in real life helps a lot. So we have our sister Esma, who is actually from New Jersey, a uh, a sister state here, obviously, and she actually went public with what she was facing in a huge company called BlackRock. Now, she alleged various discrimination and Islamophobia and harassment. And that's something that she had to endure. And I bring her up just because, for anyone who has to endure any kind of retaliatory, discriminatory behavior in any field, whether we're talking about in the workplace or otherwise, it takes a lot of courage to actually come forward, right? And so she's an example of someone who most recently went public with what her experiences were. And then a while back, we had our sister Samantha. Now, there's this huge company called Abercrombie and Fitch. Many of you know it. It is a retailer, and they have a certain look that they like to portray with their branding. And whatever that look is, they decided that wearing a hijab didn't qualify. So when our sister went to a job interview, they had inquired about her hijab, and she basically told them, this is a part of my sincerely held religious beliefs. And essentially, they didn't offer her the job. It came to light that they didn't offer her the job because of the hijab. They didn't want it on her, and they said it violates the look that they are trying to give off with their brand, right? And she didn't take it lightly. She actually CAIR. We helped her with the EEOC. The claim went into court, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. And the Supreme Court ruled in her favor. And they said that, the look policy violates her rights, violates her, and it was discriminatory in nature, and that they can't prohibit an employee because of their sincerely held religious belief to wear a head covering. Right. So there is recourse. And I want to encourage those of you that may be experiencing something to seek that legal help.
Have you guys, you don't mind me interrupting you for a moment, have you maybe studied and seen how much recourse there is for these types of cases and things like that? So obviously, you said there is recourse, but have you seen instances where there just wasn't?
So sometimes, for example, some people will come to us and say, listen, I think I've been discriminated against. And a lot of times it has to do with microaggressions, right? And it's a bit difficult sometimes to prove allegations, right? And so being able to take the totality of the facts, which will definitely differ from person to person. And that's important to note. This is all very fact specific to that particular instance, that particular experience, right? And so, yeah, sure, there's sometimes people come to us, there are microaggressions, there's no smoking guns, so to speak, right? And they feel the discrimination, they feel as if they're being treated differently, and they very well may be correct. But if it's not a part of the protected class, and if, there's no evidence for it, it may be difficult to prove. Now, I'm not suggesting to anyone that unless you have something that's blatant, that they shouldn't, go and speak to someone about it. Let the experts who are handling this ask you the questions and then make that determination for you, right? So always seek recourse and help. And one of the things, Ashley, that people can do to strengthen their cases when things like this happen is to actually make sure you're documenting instances, right? Oftentimes it happens in small discussions here and there, but nobody documents anything until they're kind of in a bind. So just having a record so that you can pull up and say, on this date, I spoke to so-and-so who said this. Then on this date, I spoke to so-and-so who said this. And those small microaggressions, when you put them together, may just provide you what you need in terms of evidence. Does that make sense?
Very much so. Yes. Thank you for that.
You're very welcome. And I kind of wanted to point out one last case again in terms of, what look policies may be, or the kind of environment that sometimes companies want to project and then discriminate against people of, whether it's people of color or hijabis, and that is Disney. Disney a few years ago also had a lawsuit on their hands, and the person who brought the lawsuit alleged that, hey, I wasn't wearing a hijab in the beginning. And this is something important because we have a lot of sisters, Ashley, who do this, right? Perhaps they don't want to wear the hijab in the beginning for whatever reason. Maybe they're not there yet in their journey, or whatever the reason may be, right? And then at some point they decide, you know what, I want to start wearing the hijab now. And then all of a sudden they're being treated differently at work because they've now donned on the hijab. Those are the allegations of this sister as well. And the reason I bring this up is to let all my sisters know that even if you choose to wear the hijab later on and you've already begun your employment, that doesn't give anyone the right to treat you differently. They can't question how sincerely you believe in your faith for it. They can't say, well, you didn't wear it before, so now all of a sudden you want to wear it. That's not for them to decide. It's you who determines what is sincerely held, and you can put on the hijab at any time of your choosing. Now, here's a statistic that I don't like to actually say out loud, but it is the truth. 45% of Muslim women who wear a hijab have either experienced a bias incident or a hate crime, or reported that a woman in their family who wears a hijab experienced a bias incident or a hate crime. And that's just within the last 12 months. Again, this is from CAIR-NY Feeling the Hate report. I would really encourage people to check it out on our website so that they can see the full load of what these survey questions brought about. For us, it was just confirmation and validation of what we've always known in terms of the prevalence of Islamophobia, of discrimination, of racism. But there's so many instances of this, and we'll definitely get a little bit more into that. And feel free to stop me anytime, Ashley.
No worries. This is very fascinating stuff. Very, very important.
Alhamdulillah. And this is not a long presentation. So inshallah, definitely I hope to be able to get even our viewers in on this discussion as well. we touched upon reasonable accommodations, right? And reasonable accommodations really depends on the context of the situation. So what is reasonable to one company may not necessarily be reasonable to another company. So for example, company A may have 5 employees, of which 3 are Muslim. The 3 want to go to Jum'ah together, but letting all 3 go to Jum'ah congregation may be a huge issue because it'll stop the entire line of work at company A, 5 employees. Company B may have 30 employees. Letting 3 people go to Jum'ah prayer is not going to halt their business in any significant way. So what may be reasonable in one setting may not be reasonable in another, and that's why I keep emphasizing the fact-specific cases that attorneys have to evaluate and assess, right? So reasonableness is really, really key. And the employer, in order to reject it, has to say so. And company B that we just spoke about, they have to say, no, even 3 people is difficult for us. And these are the reasons why, Judge. There is an undue hardship that is going to be placed upon us. We're going to lose X amount of dollars, for example, or whatever the case may be. So that is what an employer would have to prove to say, no, we can't accommodate them, even if we wanted to, because there's an undue hardship that we can't get over. And then harassment can come in different ways. Harassment is basically defined as unwelcome conduct. It can be intimidating. It can be hostile. It could be a threatening work environment. Unfortunately, we have seen that, in which people make your work life just so miserable by the way they threaten you or intimidate you or act towards you. Those can be both microaggressions in the long run versus, one huge burst. For example, it's illegal if it's based on a personal characteristic. Remember, we began with that, looking at what the law actually protects. So if you're hostile towards somebody because of one of those protected classes we spoke about in the beginning of this presentation, that's what makes it illegal. And then it needs to be severe or pervasive. And oftentimes people say, all right, that means my microaggressions don't work. That's not necessarily true. Like we said, if you documented one thing after another and it's persistent and consistent, it can rise to the threshold that's needed in order to be able to prove it in court. Harassing conduct. What is harassing conduct? It could be slurs. It could be derogatory comments. It could be verbal or physical conduct. It could be sexual harassment, right? Who is the harasser? Oftentimes people think it needs to be their boss. That's not true. It can be their colleague. It doesn't need to be their supervisor. As a matter of fact, it could even be a client or a customer. So if your boss says, listen, I'm really sorry that happened to you, but they're a loyal customer, I can't do anything about it. That is not true, at least not according to our laws here in the States, right? So we actually hold the employer responsible for correcting the action, whether that bad behavior is coming from a supervisor, a coworker, or even a client or customer, and where it could happen in the workplace, but not necessarily. It could happen outside the workplace. You may be at a work-related event, for example, outside of the workplace. You may be driving to a meeting, for example. So location is not confined to the office. Okay, so what I wanted to do at this point is actually stop. And the reason is I wanted to get a little broader than just workplace discrimination. We've basically described a very low-level overview of what discrimination looks like, by whom, and what is the threshold that an employer and an employee should utilize in terms of trying to evaluate whether an accommodation can be requested and granted. But unfortunately, discrimination happens in a lot of different places, Ashley. So I am going to close this slide and we can get into one-on-one conversations on other forms of discrimination, whether it be in the workplace that you want to follow up on or in other places.
Yeah, so what are some of those other places outside of work that somebody might experience discrimination?
Well, you spoke about a very big problem that we see yourself when you began this presentation, and that is at school. And this is something that I'm sure is worldwide. We see it from reports, whether we're talking about France's hijab bans or in the US, where we have seen a significant portion of our young sisters having their hijab either pulled or removed from them. And, you talk about bullying. We expect bullying, unfortunately, to happen from peer to peer. Another young person who perhaps learns something that they shouldn't learn, that is wrong and intolerant and discriminatory and racist, from various environments. But having said that, sometimes it happens from administrators and teachers. I remember, Ashley, this video kind of went viral of this young girl who was in a classroom. She wasn't so young. I think she was probably like a young teen.
Mhm.
And she was wearing hijab, and it was her teacher that went to her and took off her hijab in front of everybody. And the teacher kept talking about, oh, you see your hair, how much prettier you look. And the entire class is looking on. And you can see that the girl just felt so embarrassed. She literally hid her face in her hands, and put her head down. And I remember seeing that and saying, this is an educator. What kind of lesson are they teaching all the kids, right? And so, unfortunately, we do see a lot of bullying because of hijab. Obviously, you're identifiable when you wear hijab. I just did another Women's Day conference in which a young girl came up to me and she spoke to me a little bit,
Mhm.
her and her mom, about her experience and how, when she wears hijab, other kids in the class actually talk about things like, when are you bringing a bomb into school, right? And that's a very, very serious issue. That's not a joke.
No.
But what I do want to say, Ashley, and remind everyone is our community tends to be very silent on things. We let way too many things slide that no other community would allow to slide, right? And I don't know whether it's just the forgiving spirit that Islam teaches us, or maybe just cultural matters in which we say, let things go, it'll pass, no need to make something big out of it, right? But it is big. And what we're actually doing is we're normalizing bad behavior that happens to Muslims, right? Every single day. And we're teaching our kids to do the same thing, because it's not right that people discriminate against you or our kids, and they need protections. And oftentimes the protections exist if we're brave enough to assert ourselves and to make sure that they are implemented. So your rights, Sister Ashley, they're all good and dandy, but if they're only on ink, if they're only on paper,
Mhm.
and if we don't actually assert those rights, then they're not worth the paper that they're printed on, right? So I really encourage everyone to report instances, whether we're talking about bullying, whether we were talking about hate crimes in the street, because that's happened as well. I remember earlier on, we had a case in which a mom with her children were walking to the park, and they wore hijab, and one of her daughters also covered. And a woman across the street started yelling epithets at them and telling them, take that thing off, this is America. And she literally ran across the street and she shoved the stroller, which had little children in it, and she was aggressive and physical with this family. Now, this person eventually was arrested, and we, pushed for hate crime charges against her. So that actually did happen in this particular matter. But having said that, we do see these things, but it takes somebody to assert themselves first.
Very much so. It seems like, there's a lot of people who come forward, but there's probably a lot of people too who don't report these things, and that's not part of the statistics. And so there's a lot of things that we don't see, unfortunately, but they do happen. And sometimes you only find out because somebody took a video of it and it goes viral. It's very alarming.
Well, you know what, sis? We actually do have a stat for that, at least here in New York, where we did our survey, and in New York City, we realized, and again, this is something that we knew as a civil rights organization. Every single time I do a Know Your Rights workshop, I have sisters just like yourself and other people come in and they start telling me what their stories are, right? And they say, I
Mhm.
experienced this, my cousin experienced this, I know somebody who experienced this, right? So I always knew that these things existed because people share their stories with us on a one-to-one basis. But official reporting, only 4% in New York City of Muslims, both men and women, brothers and sisters, report anything to law enforcement. Now, I can't say what an astoundingly low number that is, because I'm not astounded by it. Like I said, I'm in the arena, so I knew it. But having said that, there are reasons for low reporting. A lot of it is distrust of law enforcement. And can you blame us, especially in New York, right? Where we have, you know, the NYPD is like the largest police force probably in the world, right? Certainly in the country. Having said that, there's a lot of distrust with law enforcement. And there are other reasons. Some people say, you know what, I don't think anything will come out of it. What we tell people is, look, you should be reporting this to law enforcement because policies need to change. And our community needs resources to combat this, right? And if you don't report it, then it's as if it never happened. It
Right.
doesn't exist. So how do you change something that doesn't exist? But even for those of you that don't want to report discrimination, whether it's a hate crime in the street because of your hijab or workplace discrimination or something, it's really important to reach out to organizations that do this kind of work, whether it be CAIR New York, another chapter in another state, or another
Mhm.
organization that monitors this and reports on this. Because at the very minimum, we need those numbers. We won't report it unless you give us permission to. We won't do anything without your permission. But at the very minimum, then we have the data so we can serve our own community by saying, hey, legislators, lawmakers, these are the facts. These are the numbers. We need to do something about them. So at least equip us to help you, the community, and inshallah, future generations, so we don't have numbers like the ones that I just cited.
I find it really alarming too that these are the statistics from New York, because I think when some people think of like New York State, they think, New York City, there's a lot of diversity and people seem to be a little more accepting. But I'm from originally from Arkansas, so a tiny state in the US in the South, and there's a very small Muslim population. So you can imagine too, those people are not exposed to Muslims as much either. And when they are, it's always negative. So I can imagine, what the stats look like there. And this is just New York you're showing us, right? So there's
Yes,
care
absolutely.
care chapters all across the US. So I can't imagine their statistics as well.
Yeah, so our sister chapter in California did an anti-bullying report. Some of those
Mhm.
stats apply specifically to young sisters who wear hijab, so you definitely want to check that out. But this entire idea of, okay, you're in New York City, it is, and I'm in Queens in New York City, which is the most diverse place, not just in the nation, but in the world. I mean, we have every language spoken here. We have
Mhm.
every ethnicity spoken here. You see all different kinds of beautiful shades that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, right? So it's a microcosm of Allah's creation in terms of the beauty of human diversity. Having said all of that, yeah, you're right. And part of that is because New York City also has a large Muslim population. So when you have larger numbers, it's going to happen more in the sense
Mhm.
that there are more people who it can happen to. In terms of sheer number, when you're looking at
Mhm.
percentage ratio, it's still very alarming. Oftentimes you think of places that are very progressive and you say, oh no, they have to be over racism. I'm sure it doesn't exist there. That's not true, right? We've seen all kinds of racism take place here in New York,
Right.
and we need to fight it wherever we find it.
Do you also find that once there is an incident, do you ever find a snowball effect, especially if there's like a larger incident? For example, here in Canada, um, one summer there was a family that was run down. It was a Muslim family crossing the street. They were run down by someone in a vehicle. He saw them and just said, "You know what? I'm going to take these Muslims out." And he killed them. And later, it just slowly there was this domino effect of masjids being attacked and women in hijab being attacked on the street. Do you guys see that as well? If something big happens, do you see that snowball effect?
Sometimes, and sometimes it depends on the type of incident. So, what
Mhm.
we have observed, for example, CARE has looked at this, and other organizations have looked at this, and we've seen a definite spike in hate crimes taking place and discriminatory actions taking place against Muslims in political arenas, right? Like, so when politics is hot and there is an election, an upcoming election, and especially if you have candidates who are fanning the flames of hatred, you will see that spike. And that's definitely something that happened prior to here in the US, President Trump taking office and throughout his entire, obviously, campaign, and then what led into his being in office. But we saw a huge spike, right? And that was definitely an issue that we have seen time and time again when this political rhetoric that essentially gives rise to Islamophobia because it normalizes these discriminatory, racist, ugly actions and beliefs, right? So unfortunately, we do see that. Other times that we've seen that perhaps is just, in general. And I think this is something that many of us can attest to all across the world is that Islamophobia, again, it doesn't happen in a bubble, sis. It's
Mhm.
global. And there are systemic
Very true.
policies which enable it to happen too, right? So we're talking about something that is very open and obvious sometimes, like a hate crime in the street when somebody says you don't belong here. But there are actual policies that allow for discrimination to happen that are on the books. Systemic discrimination happens because laws allow them to happen sometimes. And you may say, but you kind of pointed to laws in the beginning of this and you said these are the laws that offer recourse. Well, you know what? Here in the US, we had the Patriot Act, thousands of pages that were passed post 9/11, and we're still feeling that effect. The Muslim ban was deemed legal abhorrently and ridiculously, right? But having said that, we still see the impact of that. So sometimes hate crimes and discrimination rises also because of systemic discrimination that are embodied in pieces of legislation, which is another reason why we need to report and we need to empower ourselves with activism and civic engagement.
Well, I hope somebody that's watching this, if they're experiencing something like this, that they get the strength to, and the knowledge, maybe somebody's not thinking, hey, I need to be documenting this as I go. Because if you later realize, hey, I might have a case here and you don't have that, you're scrambling to try to get all of that evidence and stuff. Hopefully, somebody can really benefit from this chat. What advice do you have for women who maybe hesitate to wear the hijab out of fear of employment concerns?
Several years ago, a sister in the community came to me. She's a physician. And, she came to me pretty much in confidence and she said, listen, I work with other people in this private practice who are non-Muslim, and I've hesitated to wear the hijab. I hesitate to see the look on their face or to see those of clients kind of questioning me because of me wearing the hijab. What do you think? She asked me. And to be honest, I kind of took a step back and I told her the hijab is a very personal thing to you, right? You're wearing it is not based on what I think and not based on the looks that you may or may not get. The decision to wear hijab is between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is my first piece of advice for her. That's something, it's a commitment that you're making for the sake of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and nothing else. Now, once you have that in your mind, right, and you choose to do that, and your personal growth or your personal stage in life has allowed for that connection to happen and you want to do it for the sake of pleasing Allah, then all those other questions pretty much melt away and disappear, because you're not going to care about looks if you're doing it to please something bigger and and that is obviously your creator. So my advice to those who fear it, I'm also a realist, right? So I understand that there may be threats out there because we are identifiably Muslim. And I'll give you a personal story. I have daughters. When I first moved into my home, which is not that diverse of a neighborhood, it was literally a month before 9/11 happened. And so I hadn't even had the opportunity to introduce myself to my neighbors. And my daughters were very young at the time. They were just basically like 2 and 4 or something like that. And they used to wear the hijab because they would just imitate me, right? And so they would wear it every time we went out. They would grab their little hijabs and they would wear it. And my father came to me and he said, listen, you're in a new area. You don't know who your neighbors are. You don't know how they're looking at you. You're the only Muslim woman here who's wearing hijab. And given what happened, that might not be a good idea for you to be putting a hijab on your daughters at this age. They certainly don't need to wear it. They're just babies, right? They're not even required to wear it at this age. And I looked at him and I said, Dad, I will never, never tell my daughters that they need to take off their hijab out of fear that something may happen to them, because I would never be able to look at myself in the mirror if I did. That is essentially me telling them to shed their identity and to fear who and what they are. And this is me trying to implement Islam in the fullest for my kids, right? And to tell them, you need to be proud that your identity is that of a Muslim woman. How do I begin that journey and try to implement that with them if at the very base, at such a vulnerable age, I'm saying you need to hide yourself, right? You can't put on that hijab. So balancing the reality, especially when it comes to safety issues, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm not a sheikha. I didn't study Islam. I'm not a scholar, so I'm not giving anybody religious advice. Let me just kind of point that out. You should go and speak to an imam in terms of, if you feel like your personal safety is really being jeopardized by you wearing a hijab, because we know that there is a concept in Islam that says in must situations, right? There are sometimes allowances, right? But obviously, I'm not the one to make that judgment. Go speak to an imam if there's really something that is really jeopardizing your safety, because your safety matters more than anything else. But as far as I'm concerned, and this is my personal opinion, I don't impose it on anyone else, unless there is a very dominant threat, unless there is something that is very inevitable or imminent. I would always encourage people to never hide their identity, actually to do it the other way and shine as a Muslim, because when people do identify you as a Muslim and you're a good Muslim, they're only going to come off from that in a much better position, inshallah, and with much better reflections about who Muslims are. And we owe that to our faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with.
Very well said. Thank you so much for that. Is there anything else that you want to add that you think people should know about?
Only that, again, I really want to emphasize that people need to, wherever in the world they are, right? You need to document things that happen to you so that there can be activists that really are empowered with data, number one. Number two, everyone has a role to play. Whether we're talking about discrimination in the workplace against women who wear hijab, or whether they're talking about, racist policies that perhaps impact a different community. We all have an obligation to do whatever we can within our realm of comfortableness, right? To do something about it. It's just incumbent upon us based on our faith, right? To, when we see something bad, we can't just let it go, because we understand that what we see is then we're held accountable for. So everyone has something to contribute. I really encourage my beautiful, bold, intelligent sisters who have so many different things that they can offer, whether you're an at-home mom, which is like the hardest job ever, or whether you're working as an attorney or an activist or a physician or a mechanic or a construction worker or a scientist, whatever it is, devote a little bit of time to really pushing against Islamophobia, racism, whether it's against Muslims or otherwise, because like I said, this is our kids are going to inherit our world that we leave behind. So let's work together to leave them something better. And inshallah, hopefully that allows us to have a better legacy as well, so that when we present ourselves in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, we have something good to say, hey, we carried on your legacy by making this world a little better than what we left it, inshallah. Don't forget, for all those little girls, you have a whole community behind you. You have Sister Ashley, you have me, you have teams of people who've got your back, who are right there to help you to stand tall, and, just lean on us. And inshallah, this network of sisterhood and network of Muslims across the world are there for you. Use us as a resource. We're there for you.
Very well said. I've learned a lot, and I think it's really empowering to know that there's an organization like CAIR and there's people like you behind it, who are there to help them and care, no pun intended. But yeah, I think that this will be really beneficial for a lot of people, and inshallah, there will be change made in various places that really need it, and I think that's needed, across the world, honestly. But I really just thank you for your time sitting down with us to chat with us today. Thank you so much, Afaf.
It's my pleasure, Ashley. Again, thank you to all the organizers, all the people behind the scenes who are making this possible, and all the sisters across the world. You have my love and my salam.
Assalamu alaikum. And thank you to all of our viewers for joining us for this segment. It was a great discussion, and I'm sure our audience greatly benefited from this topic. Before we go, we just want to take a minute to thank our generous platinum sponsors for supporting the World Hijab Day conference this year. Jazakallah khair to our sponsors, Studious Monday and Modifa. And please stay tuned for another upcoming segment of the World Hijab Day conference. Here's a quick view of our program schedule. So we have another exciting discussion taking place. So stick around. That'll start shortly. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.